right now on Upfront.
30-day blitz.
I love Wisconsin. We should win Wisconsin. Will you please make sure?
The presidential candidates barnstorming Wisconsin.
I tell you, I have never voted for a Democrat, but this year.
Former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris.
And therein lies the profound difference between Donald Trump and me.
Former President Donald Trump back in Wisconsin today. Hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites already voting. Do you trust the process this time around? This Sunday, former Republican Governor Scott Walker and Mark Becker, the former Green Bay Republican Party leader, now endorsing Kamala Harris. Ballot box battle.
You know, his behavior is just childish. Yeah, we're embarrassed.
This weekend, the Department of Justice investigating Wausau's mayor. The city's ballot drop box back after the mayor moved it into his office.
Do you regret moving it, or are you glad that you moved it?
Now, the latest on the criminal investigation. Our reporting on the ground, one-on-one with the mayor in Wausau. Then the polls.
There's an incentive for both parties to keep pushing on the voter turnout.
Marquette's new Wisconsin poll is out. The battle for battleground Wisconsin. All the new analysis, poll director Charles Franklin on the final 4-week sprint moments away.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. The final 30-day sprint now underway. Former President Donald Trump back in Wisconsin today, set to appear in Dodge County, his 4th stop to the state in the past 8 days, campaigning in both Dane and Milwaukee counties this past week. Vice President Kamala Harris coming off that event in Ripon alongside former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. More than 450,000 absentee ballots now in the hands of Wisconsin voters. We asked Trump about that in Milwaukee. Now they're returning them in the mail, ballot drop boxes. For you to win, I'm curious what you tell voters who are skeptical of that process after they've heard you talk about things like fraud or one-day voting.
Well, I think people are going to watch the process a lot closer. Last time we had COVID, people couldn't even get out. And we have lots of lawyers watching, and we're doing it early rather than late. We're not going to do it after we're doing early. That's why you see the lawsuits filed. And we're going to try and say too big to rig. You know, we use the expression. All I want is a fair election. That's all. Just a fair, honest election. I hope we're going to get that.
Do you trust the process? Do you trust the process this time around?
Did I what?
Do you trust the process this time around?
I'll let you know in about 33 days. No, look, I'm in 33 days.
Let's bring in former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, now president of Young America's Foundation. He was in Dane County with former President Trump. Welcome to the show. Good to see you like always.
Good to be in person.
Let's start right there with what Trump was talking about in Milwaukee. Have you reassured him and his campaign that the election here in Wisconsin is going to be free and fair?
Well, the key is we've got good laws in the state. We just got to make sure they're upheld. You know, 4 years ago, they didn't follow the rules when it comes to absentee ballots. I think going to the courts, being clear of the process, if they follow the law, we're going to have a fair and safe and transparent election.
Are you confident as we sit here today, 4 weeks out?
I hope so. I mean, there were some concerns a few weeks ago about Dane County and some of the absentee ballots that went out. We're going to be on top of those things. But I think President Trump was right. The time to talk about it's now. It's not after the election. It's, you know, after the election is like spitting in Lake Michigan, and there's not a lot you can do about it. But beforehand, we can make sure that everyone follows the laws, and we'll have good elections.
You were in Dane County with him, his first stop in the liberal stronghold of Dane County. What did you tell him? What were your conversations like about what he needs to do these next 30 days to win Wisconsin?
I said, making the case as I talked to the voters there as well, I said, you know, not everybody may be comfortable voting with him, and they need to be clear about that. You may not like everything he says or every way he does it, but life was better when Donald Trump was president. Prices were lower here in Wisconsin. The border security issue was much clearer at that point, which deals with issues like fentanyl and other drugs coming in here. Public safety was less of a concern when Donald Trump was president. Making the case overall that life was better here in Wisconsin and across the country, I think is the key to his success.
As you know, Liz Cheney was in the state this past week with Kamala Harris in Ripon. She talked about her endorsement. She talked about Trump, and she talked about you as well. I want to get your reaction to that, but first, I want to play her comments.
In a time when I have heard many pretty stunning things from Republicans, one of the most stunning was yesterday from your former governor, Scott Walker, who said basically, people are over January 6th. When you think about what that means, that an elected official, a former elected official, is so willing to minimize what happened, to say things like I've heard from others, to say, don't worry, our institutions held that day. We have a responsibility, all of us, to remind people that our institutions don't defend themselves. We, the people, have to do that. We, the people, defend our institutions.
I'm curious your response to her.
Yeah, Kamala Harris is a dangerous liberal with dangerous ideas who would devastate millions of Americans. That's what Liz Cheney said before she lost her seat in Congress. I agree that she was right back then, and I think this is just a reflection of now she's appealing to an audience in Washington who seems focused on that. When I talk to voters around the state, and I've been all over the state of Wisconsin the last several years, I even said this 2 years ago before the midterms. People were concerned on January 6th about what happened, but they're more concerned right now about filling up their grocery cart, filling up their gas tank, paying their mortgage and their rental on the way. They're more concerned about the fentanyl coming in that's a threat to their kids or grandkids. They're more concerned about violent crime in Milwaukee and elsewhere across the state. Those are the things that people care about. And I'm always amazed when people come from Washington into Wisconsin and they want to lecture us on what people really care about. Those are the things people care about.
Do you really believe people are over January 6th?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is they were concerned that day. They want to make sure that we have strong safeguards in going forward. But again, the bottom line is people ask that question over and over again. And I'll tell you, even with the students we work with at Young America's Foundation, nationwide poll we did, number one issue wasn't any of the things people expect. It was the economy. They desperately want elected officials to talk about that. They're tired of elected officials in both parties in Washington failing to look out for the hardworking people.
Are you still in touch with Mike Pence? You were close with him when you guys were governors.
Yeah, occasionally talk to him. He was a former governor. We helped him at the debate prep. Was thinking about that the other day when J.D. Vance did such a fabulous job. Obviously, he did debate prep as well because he just had a natural flow to him.
What do you think he would think about that? You saying people don't care about January 6th anymore?
Well, I didn't say they don't care. I said they're over it. They've moved on. Okay. They've had a chance to speak out about it. But in the end, I mean, I think there's a lot of fact checks out there, and people look at what actually happened that day. I don't hold Bernie Sanders accountable directly for the person who shot Steve Scalise because of his rhetoric. I don't believe that Donald Trump, because of things he said at that time, was responsible for the people who went in there.
What does the ground game look like here in the state in the next 30 days?
Well, people I say at these rallies and gatherings, it's great that they're there, but that's not enough. One of the things I've got to stress as much as I can, and I know Tommy joins me in saying this, is that it's great to show up at a rally, it's great to show up in an office, but in the end, you got to go talk to your neighbors. You got to make phone calls. You got to go door to door. You got to go through your list. And that means there's a lot of people out there, I think, who are genuinely on the bubble. They hear what a lot of the national media says about Donald Trump. They get a little uneasy. I think, for example, a lot of them heard things like that about J.D. Vance, and then they saw Senator Vance the other day, and they're like, this guy's reasonable. He's sitting at my kitchen table, rationally talking about things. I think the more interactions we have like that, the better off it's going to be for President Trump and Senator Vance.
When it's all said and done election night, how close is it going to be here in the state?
Oh, razor thin. I think a few thousand votes. I mean, the last two are indicators. Last two elections, I tell people nationwide, less than 6 million people in the state, and we had fewer than 25,000 votes determine not only who wins Wisconsin, but as we've seen the last two times, whoever wins Wisconsin wins the country. They're the next president.
And we're entering the final sprint. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, Governor, like always, thank you.
Thank you.
And if people across Wisconsin and our nation are willing to do what Liz is doing, to stand up for the rule of law, for our democratic ideals, and the Constitution of the United States, then together I know we can chart a new way forward.
The Harris campaign looking to capitalize on Thursday's event in Ripon with Liz Cheney promoting the support of Republican officials. That includes the former head of the county GOP party in Green Bay, Mark Becker, who attended Thursday's event.
Let's start with where we are. I mean, you're the former Republican chair in Brown County, in Green Bay. Politically, what do you consider yourself today?
So I'm a fiscal conservative with a social conscience. You know, I still believe in things like limited government and all that kind of stuff, but I also believe that women should have the right to do with their own body what they choose. and my brother who's gay, he should get married to the person they love. So I still would consider myself like a centrist.
If someone 10, 15 years ago said you were going to be voting for the Democratic presidential ticket, you would have said what to them?
I would have laughed and walked away. Like, you're nuts. Yeah.
And to see Liz Cheney here in Wisconsin today alongside Kamala Harris, what does that mean?
It's remarkable. I think the Harris campaign did a wonderful job of bringing people in like myself to form the most diverse coalition that stretches from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney, to Taylor Swift. I mean, it's remarkable what they've done. Yeah.
When you're out and about in the community, what are you telling people about why you're going to vote for Harris?
We're at a point in our country where it's not about left versus right, it's about right versus wrong. And it's like Joe Biden said, we're in a battle for the soul of the nation. And it's true.
I'm sure, as you know, Republicans will tell you, well, you guys are a joke. You never were a Republican. I mean, what do you hear from Republicans?
Yeah, Rhino, and there was someone just the other day that I've known for 20 years, and he's like, "Oh, you're a huge Democrat." It's like, since when? Okay, that's news to me. But it's all of that kind of stuff.
And what do you say to them?
I say that, again, it's not about left versus right. It's about right versus wrong. And when you have, the party is unrecognizable. It's unrecognizable that they have to gloss over the fact that the leader of their party has convicted of dozens of felonies and tried to overturn and overthrow a free and fair election. It should be as simple as that.
Who's going to win Wisconsin? How close do you think it's going to be here, and how do they win Wisconsin?
Oh, I think Kamala Harris is going to win Wisconsin. I think finally, for the first time in a decade, we have maps that represent the will of the people. So that will bring people up from, it's a groundswell, I think, from all sorts of legislative districts to Senate districts. Tammy Baldwin helps. And it also helps that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is fueling this incredible coalition that is welcoming people like me.
Do you agree with them 100% on policy?
I don't, but that's okay. That's okay. And, they are the party. When I was a Republican, I would do speeches about how we are the party of the big tent. Now, it's not the Republican Party. They're unrecognizable. They're the party of litmus tests and unity pledges. And the Democrats are the ones that are inviting people like me in. So the big tent is here.
Coming up, that ballot drop box battle in central Wisconsin. This weekend, the Justice Department now investigating that city's mayor. And we're on the ground, one-on-one with him, next.
Matt from WISN in Milwaukee.
Hi, Matt.